just don't believe it.
Really? Gosh, you'll be happy with that.
Oh, lovely. How did you get this one?
Well, I inherited it from my father, but I had seen it before, about 50 years ago, when I was a lad. And I found it in a tin box whilst looking through the cupboard.
Hang on, let me stop you. You mean you haven't seen this watch for about 50 years?
No, that's true.
How
50
incredible.
years ago.
We've got a running seconds in this lower dial here. We've got the normal minutes and hour display.
Right.
And then we've got the day of the week here on that subsidiary. On this other one, in the 3 o'clock position, we've got the date. And then up here below the 12 o'clock, we've got phases and age of the moon. And a little sign saying Greenwich time. So it's a full calendar watch with lunar work. And you've never seen it. It's absolutely incredible. And let's have a look. Oh. This is, to think that this has been put away for 50 years. We've got there 7 subsidiary dials for the cities that would have been important then. The centre is Paris. We've got New York, St. Petersburg, Calcutta, and then at the bottom, Melbourne. Fancy that.
The one thing that does puzzle me is, would it have been used by a traveller, or is it just a novelty to have the times of the different cities?
I think we could say that's a seriously rich man's toy.
Oh, right. No.
Any thoughts on its value?
No, no idea.
Today, realistically, one would be looking around £4,000 as a starting figure.
Just don't believe it.
Well,
No.
I wonder how many goodies there are
Well,
in that tin.
in the tin, exactly. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was given to me by my husband for a 40th wedding anniversary because the pilot is Bob Stanford Tuck.
Fine, in the Spitfire.
In the Spitfire.
Yes.
And I was a WAF in 11 group, the same group during the war, and stationed at Tanmere.
Right, so you knew Robert Stanford Tuck.
Yes, I knew Robert Stanford.
Did you work with him, or?
No, he just used to come. They used to come into Tanmere if they were fighting in the district.
And this was during the Battle of Britain?
Yeah.
Right. Did you know him well? What was he
We
like?
got to know him later better. He was a tough guy.
Yes, well, it sounds like it.
Yes, very nice.
Great
indeed.
leader, I gather.
Great leader, adored by all.
Very
his,
cool and very, never foolhardy, just a great leader of men.
Yes.
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 In 1941, in the summer of 1941, he took over a fighter wing in Duxford, which was operating fighter sweeps over northern France. Now, this was us taking the action to the Germans rather than them coming to us all the time. And the fighters would go out to seek enemies over the skies of France. And on one of those outings, I gather in about October 1941, he had this encounter with the great German ace, Adolf Galland, who was in effect his equivalent in German terms. And they had a dogfight together. They both survived it, although both shot down the other's wingman. So they each shot the other's lieutenant, if you like, but both survived. And at the time, Stanford Tuck did not know it was Galland, but I think Galland may have known it was him. Later, in January 1942, he himself was shot down over France and became a prisoner of war. And the day he was shot down, January 28, 1942, he had dinner in the German officers' mess at Saint-Omer with Galland, and apparently they discussed exactly this incident. Now, Wotton, I mean, to me, is simply the greatest 20th century aviation artist. And when one looks at paintings like this, you think, well, what are we dealing with? Are we dealing with modern history? Are we dealing with recreated history? Now, with someone like Wotton, he was painting during the war. His best-known paintings, which established his reputation, were in 1944. Typhoons, rocket firing in the Falaise Gap is one that everybody knows. And he established a reputation. And I think when one looks at a painting like this, to me it has two things. One, I think it's a fabulous and wonderful piece of painting. Forget the subject matter. Fabulous, tumultuous sky, lovely clouds. This is actually northern France under there. I think we've got two things here, two pieces of history. We've got a painting by, to me, a modern master, now dead, unfortunately, as indeed is Stanford Tuck. He died in 1987, I think. We've got a record of a very important part of British mid-20th century history. It's heroics, it's all that. I think it's lovely, and I'm so glad that actually to meet you, who can in fact bring it to life in another way. You can say, I know who that man was.
Yes.
And to me, that's magic.
Yes.
And I mean, in terms of valuing it is terribly difficult. I mean, Wootton obviously has a market value. I don't really want to go into it because it was a present to
I know
you.
how much he paid for it, though.
Well, am I allowed to ask that?
Yes, he paid £1,500.
Yeah, well, I mean, my valuation was 2,000 to 3,000. But I think the money is not important. What is important is your connection and the fact that we have here this, not just some aeroplanes in the sky, but a real slice of our history. I love it.
Yes, good.
Thank you very much.
Chocolate Tommy Atkins, number 6971, and I've got ambulance nurse. And they've survived intact.
That's right, yes.
And where do you get them from?
My late godmother, she died in September, and I've been clearing her house out.
Right.
And I've been told they're about 1920s.
Well, they're made by Pascal's, London, and I have seen one or two of these before, but never in complete condition. Now, I mean, this is very unusual survival, really. If you were patriotic in the First World War, you would have bought these chocolates in support of the troops. And the chocolate's discoloured the crepe paper a bit, but it's essentially all there. What you don't want to do is to come out on a very hot day.
That's right. Look, it's a bit cooler today.
No, and I wouldn't recommend eating them either. And just bits of fun, really. What would somebody pay in a sale for them? Probably somebody would pay for the two £50 to £100, something like that.
Right. Okay.
But good fun,
much.
though.
Yes, that's right.
I bought it in one of these antique centres in London about a year ago.
Yeah.
It was a case of love at first sight.
Love at first sight, yes.
It was a pattern that I already have in two other pieces.
Right.
Nothing on the size of this. I managed to persuade the colleague I was with that I needed it. I couldn't quite afford it at the time.
Oh,
so
that was a problem. You wanted it, but you couldn't afford it.
No.
How did you resolve that?
Well, I bought one half of it.
You bought a half?
Yes.
Which half is yours?
The front side.
Oh, the front half is yours.
With the intention that if it was worth its value later on,
Yes.
I could actually acquire the second half.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I suppose right at the start then we need to know what your half cost.
£800.
£800 for half of the vase. I think it's the finest Carlton Ware vase that I've seen. There is some printed work at the top of the vase, but when we come down through this lovely willow tree to the handwork on the bird here, with each separate feather colour applied by hand, we can see that it's a magnificent piece of work and has taken hours and hours of time to do. Let's turn it round just to look at the design all the way around. We'll see that this wonderful bird is on the other side, caught in flight. It's almost a photographic image of it. It's absolutely wonderful. And the shape, after a Chinese shape, is absolutely gorgeous. Down the inside of the vase, we have these lustres, which Carlton Ware were famous for.
Yeah.
They're lustre glazes. But unusually for this quality of vase, they haven't used much lustre work on it. This vase was made about 1928.
Yes.
It's a rare pattern. It's very unusual in size. So for all the reasons that you fell in love with it, they were all the right reasons, because it's a wonderful object. Carlton Ware is just becoming more and more collectible at the moment. People are really beginning to appreciate the quality of the work, which by the 1920s was as good as anyone. I think if you put this into an auction at the moment, you would get £3,000 for it.
For that size?
£3,000 for that
At
vase.
this current moment?
At this stage.
Gosh.
It's a great object.
So it is worth acquiring the second half then?
It was a peace offering from my husband after a very disastrous dinner party in which one of the guests he'd invited didn't eat anything I had served. And I actually had to send out to the local pub for steak and kidney pie for her.
Well, it's a very, very pretty thing. It's, as you know, opals, beautiful opals. Before about 1850, opals came from Czechoslovakia, and they were horrible, dull little things. And in 1850, they started opening up the opal mines in Australia. And where opals get this lovely colour from, this lovely play of colour, is they're made of silica and water. And it's the water which actually makes the opal, because it's like an oil slick. You get this play, diffraction between the different layers of the silica with the water in between. And that's sometimes why people think opals are unlucky, because they can dry out. So you don't really want to keep them in a very, very dry atmosphere. And did you manage to find out what your husband paid for it?
No, I shouldn't think it was over the top, because I don't think it was that big an apology.
Oh, really? Well, I think it was a pretty handsome apology, actually, because for insurance purposes, I would value this necklace at somewhere between £5,000 and £6,000 today.
What? I'm going to have to apologise to him.
Well, I definitely think so.
Oh, good God.
I've just spotted that one, actually.
Oh, this one? Oh, that was a birthday present.
Oh, that's a pretty fabulous one as well.
That, I think, was reasonably expensive. But
yes, that looks like a few £1,000s. Well, thank you.
really?
Well, that's much more valuable, actually, because that's a black opal.
Well, I think my husband paid about £1,500 for it.
Does it? Oh, well, he's obviously got a good eye for these things.
I think I should keep
I'll
him.
have to employ him myself. Well, thank you for bringing them anyway. That's really great.
I don't believe it.
When I come to a roadshow, I think it's particularly dangerous to try and anticipate what one might find. And I suppose coming to Oldham and this particular part of the country, one must think, well, possibly a work by Ellis Lowry might turn up. But I must say, when this popped out, I mean, I couldn't have been more surprised and delighted, because as far as I'm concerned, it's absolutely right. Having said that, of course, we must go to the museum, the Lowry Museum, and have it checked out. But all my instincts and the way that it looks makes me feel it is absolutely spot on and beautiful. What's the story?
I brought it in for a friend of mine, an elderly gentleman, about 79 years of age. They did belong to his wife, who's passed away. She used to chauffeur Lowry. He was very fond of having people chauffeuring about all over the country. And this is how they came into his possession.
Yes. To all intents and purposes, Lowry's style, these industrial buildings, the figures, the busy streets, are all rather similar, but I think from this particular period, and if I haven't been mistaken, the date is 1937, a good early period. I just love the colour and the busyness of the streets, and for my own taste, it is not too melancholic, it's not too brooding, it has a busyness and kind of optimistic air, which sometimes is not always apparent in his paintings. Thick paint, we call it impasto. You can see here that he's drawn right through the thickness of paint across these bits here. And particularly love that passage here, these figures in the distance, so they're pushed in and just touched with colour. And also one of the things about it is one can judge it quite carefully, because when they haven't been protected by glass, they get full of grime and dirt. And this has got glass on it, and it's kept the dirt off it. You can see right the way through, and just a little bit of a gentle clean will bring it up into an absolute gem. Now, before we turn to values, let's also look at these other things. Tell me about this little drawing here.
This is a cigarette packet.
Right. Now you can see that, because here are the folds of it here going across there. Yes.
When this lady was chauffeuring Lowry, he was sat in the car and he started to sketch this. And then when he finished, he was about to throw it through the window, and she said, "Don't do that." And he said, "Well, I'll sign it for you if you want it. It might be of some value someday."
Really? What a lovely story.
Yeah.
So do you think he really was going to throw it out the window?
Yeah. He didn't realise his value of his paintings then.
No. And we've got a photograph here of the great man himself.
Yeah.
And what is so interesting is that, of course, if you could just hold that a second, of course, it shows the subject This is a painting, and this is a drawing for this painting, but it's the same
yeah.
subject, which is a ferry, isn't it, in
Yes.
Scotland, isn't it?
Yes,
the Scottish
it is,
subject.
yeah.
Yes. And again, this is the later date, September 1958. Now, of course, what we must do is kind of try and work out the value. Now, my word of caution is the attributions must be confirmed by the Lowry Museum. But these little bits and pieces, the cigarette packet, I don't know whether it's worth 1,000 or more, but it could well be. This drawing, a number of £1,000s. But I think what we're really all dying to kind of really try and know is, what's this worth? Does your friend have any idea of what he thinks it's worth?
No, no.
He's a shy man, is he?
Oh, yes. Very shy.
Well, I think it's probably worth £100,000.
Oh, gosh. Oh. Oh.
It now becomes a horrible problem, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. Yes.
If I was being conservative, I suppose 60 to 80, but I think it is so fresh, so wonderful, has not been on the market. The prices have been quite extraordinary, and I wouldn't be surprised if it could fetch £100,000 or more.
It's never been up the wall.
It's probably one of the largest long case clocks I've ever seen. It's absolutely massive, isn't it?
It's 9'2", I believe.
9'2", is it?
I think so, yes. Is it?
Well, I'm 6'2" and a bit, so yes, it's rather taller than me, that's all I can tell you. But the quality is fantastic. I mean, it's really making a statement, isn't it? Mm. Are you tall enough to wind it?
Yes. Oh, on a stool.
I love it. Well, up in the top of the arch, we've got a strike silent and a chime silent, so you can turn off everything. It's obviously a 3-train movement, and I see it's retailed by Dutton & Son of Oldbury. The date we're talking about are the last few years of the last century. Maybe just sort of into this century, but I'd rather say the 1890s in all honesty. So originally, of course, this would have been very nicely silvered, and these gilt numbers would have shown up very well. Now, someone's obviously had a crack at cleaning this, but this can be resilvered without any trouble at all. Slightly unusual. I was expecting for a clock of this size to see 8 gongs, but we've only got 4. Obviously 3 trains, so 3 different weights. The mirrored back, but just look at it. I mean, look at the carving in this oak case. So, what would it fetch at auction? Probably £5,000 or £6,000 as a bare minimum. And to the right customer who wanted a big clock for a very large, impressive house, I could well see somebody spending at least £10,000 to £12,000 in a shop for it. So, keep looking after it.
I know, it's never going to go. It's in the family. It's too much to us.
Presented to Mr. Lees Firth by his friends as a token of respect, March 1877.
That is right.
Is this a relative of yours?
My great-grandfather, the first Lees Firth. I am the 4th Lees Firth.
He was what? He was an auctioneer, was he?
He was, indeed. And it's passed down from my great-grandfather to my grandfather to my father and now to me.
But the interesting thing about this, and I've talked to our other auctioneer friends here today, they've never seen another like it because of this.
The whistle. Yes.
They've never seen one.
To call order in the auction room.
It's odd that really, isn't it? Because you'd have thought he'd have just, bang the havel on the table.
That's right.
Now you're an auctioneer.
Yes.
You tell me, give me an estimate of how much you think it's worth.
It must be worth well over £1,000. Well over £1,000.
You know there's a difference of opinion here.
I know.
Our people here say about 600.
They want it.
I inherited it from my father about 12 years ago. Mm-hmm. He had bought it, I presume, at auction about 30 years ago. I don't know any more about it.
Was he a hunting man?
No, he just loved paintings.
And he liked dogs?
My mother loved dogs, and I think it was probably on her persuasion.
Yes. It's of 2 hounds, foxhounds, and it's by an artist who really spent most of his life painting that one thing. It's John M's, and here's the signature here. He signed himself in this funny way, J-N-O,
yes.
But I don't know why he did that, but he's John M's, 1894. You might think that this is a sketch or a study, but in fact, M's painted like this. It is quite loosely done, do you see here? Quite sketchily painted with sort of blobs of colour and even a bit of blue here, do you see? And then the background, quite blank and just sort of sketched in very quickly. Well, this is typical of M's, and I'm quite sure it is, in fact, a finished picture. And M's lived, in fact, in London and in Lyndhurst in Hampshire, not far from here.
Yes.
And I suspect nearly all his work was commissioned. In other words, he was commissioned by fox hunting people and masters of hounds to paint their favourite hounds. Often they have the names of the hounds underneath,
Oh, goodness.
but not on this one.
No.
Because they were in the world of fox hunting, obviously very much in breeding hounds too.
Yes.
So Ems was one of those kind of Victorian specialist artists who literally became the hound man. And his pictures have become increasingly popular in the last 10 years, I would say. It's very much part of a revival of interest in dog painting, and there are specific sales and auctions now held, you know, of dog pictures coinciding with crafts and so on and so forth. So the result has been a considerable increase in the value of paintings like this, in particular John M's. And I would say, it might surprise you to learn that if this went up at auction, I think you'd get £6,000 to £8,000 for it.
Gosh.
You might even get 10 on a good day. So your father did well.
That's very good news. Thank you very much indeed. Lovely.
Well, basically, they're my mother-in-law's, which I think she got hold of about 35 years ago. She actually paid £160 for them.
Right. The work of Charlie Baldwin, the Royal Worcester factory.
Yes.
And Charlie Baldwin specialised in swans. I mean, during his career, he painted many hundreds of vases, usually with swans flying around the vases. What makes these so unusual is the swans are swimming. And that really does make them different. And it'll be interesting to see just what date they were painted. They'll have a mark on the bottom for the factory year code. Right. The year mark, little dots around the Worcester factory mark. And here this one's got 8 dots. That makes it 1899.
1899.
And that is that makes sense because that's quite early for this decoration. Most of Charlie Baldwin's swan vases are painted between 1900 and 1904. And they're a very formal pattern, but they're not very detailed. These are, well, really much more real swans, but they look more fluffy. And that's, I think, very typical of the early work of Charlie Baldwin. He did the whole lot, all the decoration. He will have signed them. His signature is just there, neatly painted, C. Baldwin. And well, not ignore the vases themselves. These modelling of the handles by James Hadley. I mean, the whole concept just works together so well. I mean, it was a new, light, airy style of decoration which Worcester was just working out, and they were to become enormously popular.
Right.
Both at the time and indeed now. So we're going to look at, say, £15,000, perhaps even £20,000.
Really? Gosh, you'll be happy with that. That's great. Really good.
This wood has been cut with one of those really rough two-man saws, and this panelling has stayed together for 300 years. Yes. If a picture's on panel, it makes an enormous difference. You can almost date the picture from the back, and this is a wonderful panel. If every picture tells a tale, please tell me.
Well, some years ago, my father and I, we were refurbishing a room in our Tudor house, and there was a Victorian fireplace which we took out, which revealed a Tudor fireplace, and above that was layers and layers of wallpaper. So we decided to start scraping it off, and
so this was the wallpaper was stuck to this.
Yes.
It's obviously a smart 17th century house, and it's wonderful. I mean, the red brick glows. These houses did glow then. It's a fair bet to assume that this is a real house. It's not a fantasy house. And this, I'm sure, is by an English painter, not a Dutch painter. Say about 1700, 1710, 1720. The panelling tells us that, the whole way it's put together. We can trace the history of this sort of painting very easily. And the reason, as you can see, the reason I wanted to show the back of the panelling is there's not a split, barely a split on this panel. And the reason is this is seasoned wood, 20-year-old wood, so it doesn't move. Good lesson for builders today. Wonderful.
Well, it's just one that, to me and my mother, we think that this is out of position compared with the landscape, which looks quite normal. And it seems to me as though that they've put the landscape in, and then as an afterthought, they've put the building.
Well, had you thought that really the landscape that we know today in England is basically an invention of the 18th century? This artist is very happy putting in these abstract shapes. I mean, this is a wonderful abstract painting as well. And this formality of gardens is something that comes from Europe, imposing an architectural statement on the landscape. In fact, in Britain now, because of Capability Brown and Humphrey Repton, we do exactly the opposite. We garden to the landscape. We like to garden as though it's natural. But there's another thing, which is very interesting. You said this picture was over the mantelpiece.
That's right, yes.
One of the interesting things about the fashion of having your house painted was that they replaced portraits. So it was actually exactly where it should have been for the fashion of the day. I think it's wonderful.
Yes.
And I think it's very interesting. I mean, I've never seen such a complete British painting of this period in a way. It's very difficult to price something like this, but I think at least 10 to 15,000. It's a wonderful object.
Thanks so much.
Oh dear, speechless. I'm speechless.
During the war, which was of course before your time, they used to have war weapons weeks and Battle of Britain weeks and one thing and another. And these used to be set up as an inspiration in the local village shop window.
Are you a soldier collector?
No, my father was, and I've inherited them.
Right, and were these things that he collected or were they things he owned as a child?
He owned them as a child.
Were you allowed to play with them?
Only on very rare occasions, in the lounge, on the carpet.
Right.
Under supervision.
Because the reason I ask is it's extremely unusual to find the things in such good condition, and with the original boxes as well. I particularly like this set here. A lot of the soldiers you brought in are by William Britton, and this is a lovely early set. This is the military field hospital, and the little patients are like, they look almost as though they're sunbathing with their hands behind their heads and they're sort of bandaged. They all look rather cheerful, but it might be because they're being helped by all these little nurses here. This would have been made for the Boer War. This is pre-1914-18 war.
That's what I wanted to know.
But I notice you've got a few extras that have crept in. They're actually station porters, and your father's obviously added to it, and he's painted little crosses on their armbands and things. He mustn't have thought they had enough medicine, so that's quite sweet. This particular set here would be, it's a reasonably common one, but this is in nice condition. This would, at auction, be around £200 or so. This other set you have is extraordinary because it's just so large, and again, you've got this wonderful original box. And this is a little bit earlier, this is late 19th century. And although it's got this big London trade label on it, I think actually the soldiers are probably by a company called Heidi of Germany. They've got tin plate saddle cloths, they're beautiful, beautiful quality. And bands are always very, very desirable and collectible. Was this a particular favourite of your father's and of yours?
Yes, yes.
It was?
Yes.
This one is probably the most valuable of all these sets. I would say that this at auction would probably make in the region around £600 to £800. Possibly 1,000 if people got really carried away with it. And I think the collection as a whole, you're probably looking at around £900, £1,000 on the low end for the William Brittons, and about, as I say, 600 to 1,000 for the military band.
It's got £1 on the bottom of the
box. Has it? Has it? On this one here?
Yes.
That's pretty good return then, isn't it, after all these years? It's amazing.
Well, there's a splendid collection of Staffordshire figures you brought along. Have you been collecting for a long time?
Yes, this collection was compiled over about a 20-year period, mainly in the 60s and 70s.
Oh, so these were bought when these things were not quite as fashionable as they are now?
That's right. A lot of the smaller figures were around sort of £15.
These are very interesting figures because most of them were made in the 1820s and 1830s, and they have this bocage, this frond-like thing and behind, And this is really in imitation of the 18th century figures, I'm sure you know, like Chelsea and so on. It's a part of the revived Rococo to have these as part of their style. And they really are very remarkable, but in another way, they are just sort of peasant art. They're not very sophisticated, and at the time they were made, they were very inexpensive to buy. People just got them at fairgrounds and so on, and they reflected the life of the times. They actually predate, of course, the Staffordshire flatback figure. I'm sure you know that. Yeah. I particularly like this figure, Songsters, and there you see she is playing a triangle, he's playing some kind of flute. It's a wonderful figure, that, and on the back we have the mark, Walton. Now, Walton, of course, John Walton, who was potting from 1820 to 1846, and is principally known for this kind of figure. So that's a rare figure.
And it's one of a pair.
And it's one of a pair. And then here we've got this ram, and again you've got the bocage at the background, and we turn him round again, and another name, which is a very rare name, Selman. Now, Selman, I don't know if I've ever seen another Selman marked piece. He was a potter who came after John Walton in the 1860 period, 64, 65. And that's an extremely rare figure. You can perhaps see on it there has been some repair. And this is one of the problems with these figures, I'm sure you realise.
Yes.
And that affects the price. The figures have gone up a great deal in price since you paid 15 or 20 pounds or whatever it was for them. Those nowadays, with the mark, are getting on for something in the region of 750, even £1,000 for one that's not been restored.
What, for a pair?
For
or
a pair.
For the pair?
Yeah. No, sorry, each.
Each?
Each.
You're staggering.
Well, they've gone up enormously. And as for the others, they will range dependent on the amount of damage, the amount of restoration, the rarity of the figure, a bit like postage stamps, but they will range over anything from £300 to £700 or £800 each.
It's very pleasing.
You live in a house that it fits into well?
The dining room is tall enough to take this big piece of furniture, and I have a lot of big pieces. I had the opportunity to buy them in the early 60s when you could pick them up for very little.
How much?
This costs £7.10, 10 shillings, and it cost about £8 to carry it on a flatback pickup truck.
Right. It is absolutely typical of the enormous clocks that were made locally for the newly rich mill owners. They wanted something big and bold to show that they had made it.
Yes.
But in a funny sort of way, despite the fact it's grand and impressive, it's not terribly expensive. Because in fact, as a clock, it has almost no interest at all. Horologically, it is nothing.
Right, yes.
The dial and movement were almost certainly made in Birmingham.
Yes.
And they were sent up here to order, to Mr. Smith's order, and simply painted up and put into a locally made case around about 1840, much later than people think. In fact,
I didn't realise it was as old as that.
Oh, right, really?
No, I had no
when
idea.
people see this highly figured mahogany with this Gothic shaping to it, people think, that's going to be a late Regency clock, i.e. 1820s, 1830s, something like that. It isn't. This is pure high Victorian, could even be as late as 1860.
Right, I see.
But it's a wonderful, wonderful example of a local clock.
Oh, good.
These things have only just become of any value at all. All the nice little clocks have gone. People are turning to these. Even the door is nicely panelled. You've lost a piece of moulding there, but that's nothing. It's a well-made item.
Yes.
And so the good news is it is not worth just the £5 or the £7, 10 shillings. In a sale now, one as good as this would make the best part of £2,000. It'll certainly make over £1,000, yeah. It's a good thing.
Well, as far as I know, it belonged to my great-grandmother, but I don't know anything more about it. She came from Yorkshire, and I suppose ladies of her status would have worn tiaras quite often and brooches like that.
A typical form for a mid-19th century piece of English diamond work, and technically it's interesting because on the back it's of gold, and yet on the front it's set into silver, and it was to be worn in candlelight, and so there wasn't much concern about the front tarnishing, which it does a tiny bit. Have you worn it? Does it got lots of memories for you? I bet it has.
Possibly at army dances, but I don't go to those sort of things nowadays.
Not as a brooch or in your hair?
No, as a brooch.
It's a wonderful, spectacular display of natural beauty, isn't it? And very flattering. Wonderful, wonderful thing. It's high Victorian. Yeah. It's really couldn't be a more elegant form, and perhaps put it down on your insurance policy for £8,000, something like that. More than you thought?
Shall I tell you how much it's on my insurance for?
Do, go on.
400.
400. Well, it's only 20 times the amount.
This is true.
It's just delightful. The shape of the top followed through with the front, and this lovely colour. And it's a little gem, I think. It dates from the early 18th century. I mean, difficult to be too precise, but 1710 to 1720, that sort of period. In England, it would be Queen Anne / George I. But I don't think it's an English one. I don't think it's Irish, really. I think it's continental. It has this flow to it. If we say Dutch, it's that sort of area, that sort of feel to it. And they influenced the rest of the Western world and later on America. And you see this type of double serpentine curve developing into a block front, if it were American, of the 1740s. So structurally, it's a very interesting thing. The way they've used this heavily curled veneer, this walnut with these burrs in, and divided it into and opened it up like a butterfly's wing, so that it reflects both sides. Wonderful, and a lovely crusty colour, not over clean. These handles are new. They're about 1890 to 1900. Right. Whereas these are the original escutcheons.
Okay.
Now, they used exactly the same metalware in Holland as they did in England and in France at this time. So this is no indication of provenance, but those are certainly of the period of the chest, 1710 to 1720. And interestingly, you can see where the original handles went, which precisely matched this escutcheon in pattern. If we go to the bottom, it should have little bun feet, but little tiny, like if you'd squashed a melon, rather like that, sort of an oval shape, much lower and a little bit more round, if you like, a little bit more chubby, and far shallower. So I suppose it would have stood at least 2 inches lower on the ground.
Okay, yes.
Now, for one reason or another, we will never know, it wasn't tall enough for a particular purpose. And not only did they raise the feet, they also put a new rail in here, because that rail is nothing to do with it at all.
Yes.
I called it a little gem to start with. You can imagine it would have looked a perfect proportioned little piece of furniture.
Right.
Do you use it now?
What do I use it for?
Yeah.
I use it for holding my socks, and the top drawer is junk.
A sock and junk chest. Well,
That's right.
isn't that super? I suppose if it turned up today and you, or rather, let's put it the other way, if you lost it or it got damaged and you wanted to replace it,
yes,
it would cost you £8,000 to £10,000. All right.
As everyone says, that is surprising.
Well, I have a bit of a history with Jessie Marion King, the artist, because in the mid-1970s, I forget when, her daughter came to me, Merle Taylor, with tea chests full of wonderful things, original drawings, the books, designs, and it was like a magic lucky dip. And so this is rather important to me because this is a very beautiful drawing. Now, you bought it with this book, so tell me about this.
The poem is about Kilmeny, and it's an epic poem by James Hogg, the Ettrick Shepherd, and Kilmeny was stolen away by the fairies.
So Kilmeny was a beautiful...
Yes, a beautiful young woman. Now, Jessie M. King was a friend of my grandmother.
Yes.
And from this poem, Jessie M. King decided to do this very nice drawing and named after my grandmother and gave my grandmother the pet name of Kilmeny at that time. Right. And gave the drawing to my grandmother.
So this must have been about 1905, I imagine, the date of the book.
Yes.
You must have been rather excited by this poem.
Yes.
Very Jessie M. King poem, then.
Yes.
Yes.
She must have loved it, and then this came afterwards.
And they lived in Glasgow?
Paisley, yes.
In Paisley, because Jessie King lived in Kirkcudbright, didn't she?
Right, yes.
Yes. What was so extraordinary about Glasgow at this period, at the turn of the century, was that, in a way, it was far ahead of other movements I mean, first of all, we have Charles Rennie Mackintosh, not only the great architect, but doing beautiful penwork and coloured illustrations. And when Charles Rennie Mackintosh and the McNairs went to Vienna in 1900, they were the toast of Vienna. I mean, Vienna was blown away by this Glasgow style, what we know as the Glasgow style, this wonderful Art Nouveau style. So that was 1900. 1902, there was a grand exhibition in Turin, a very important international exhibition, and Jessie King went there with her designs. She won the gold medal. Young Jessie King won the gold medal for a pen and ink book design on vellum. Now that brings us back to this illustration, which is just a few years later, but this probably is 1905, just 3 years later. It's on vellum, which is what we expect of the finest Jessie Kings. It's translucent in a way. If you really look at this, it's not like paper where the light bounces off the surfaces here. It is almost translucent. And then the other thing, by the time we start looking at this drawing, then we begin to really marvel at Jessie King, because we see this minute penwork. And we have to remember that she couldn't change anything. So when she put these strokes down, they remain these finest strokes. And when we think about the Glasgow style and the style that blew Vienna wide open, we then start looking, first of all, let's look at her signature here. Yes. And that wonderful, elegant, elongated lozenge shape. And we look at the flowers, and it reminds us of Frances MacDonald. Yes. It's as though it was drawn by a fairy, isn't it?
Yes.
Extraordinary. I would be tempted to put £5,000 on it. But because it is such a beautiful, perfect Art Nouveau Jessie King, I think that £10,000 is much more appropriate.
Mickey Mouse is certainly my favourite cartoon character. Was he yours?
He was, very much so, yes. He's been a great friend for a long, long time, Mickey Mouse.
So you've had him since?
Oh, I should say about 65 years, something like that, in that area. And he's been played with quite a lot. Not so much mine for a few years, but it still plays a little bit tune. Minnie is supposed to dance.
She stands up there and dances up and down?
Yes, she's supposed to dance, yes.
Unfortunately, it's a one-armed Mickey.
Yes, he was in the, we'll say he was in the war.
He was in the wars. Well, these were made in Germany, in fact.
Germany?
And Germany was where the majority of tin plate toys were made between the wars.
Yes.
And specifically for the English or American market. What's nice about this is all this lithography showing Mickey's antics.
Yes.
And what's often missing from this toy is Minnie, because she probably just lifts off, and children very good at getting these lost.
Yes, yes.
So it's quite rare to find one still with the Minnie Mouse there. What about the box? What happened to the box?
The box? Oh, no. Don't know where the box is. No.
I don't know if you've noticed, but if you just look at Mickey here, he's got teeth.
Ah, yes.
Do you see?
Yes, he has.
And he's got quite a pointy nose as well.
Yes.
As the history of the cinema progressed, so he became more soft-looking, and he didn't have such a picky nose, and he lost his teeth. So we know it's an early one because both he and Minnie have got their teeth, grinning teeth.
Yes.
But to a collector of Mickey Mouse memorabilia, this is one of the great rarities.
Yes.
The majority of collectors of Disney memorabilia are in America.
Yes.
And because this is a European piece, and they never see them over there, it is an extraordinarily rare piece. Have you ever had it valued?
No, never.
Well, it's got a bit of wear on it. He's only got one arm, but even so, I can see it fetching at auction somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000. So a very nice. And you've looked after it.
6 and 7.
6,000 to 10,000 pounds.
6 to 10. Good life. Well done, Mickey.
This painting, which you've kindly brought along today, is by Walter Osborne,
a very interesting artist, an Irishman born in Dublin, and he painted in a very modern way, really. And this one, painted in 1901, is done in a most beautiful, very liquid way. He's brought the brush very quickly across the surface of the canvas to suggest the dress. He's done an awful lot of suggestion and successful depiction with very little actual brush strokes. You know, it's almost abbreviated. It's like a shorthand. Of course, it's quite thinly painted in some areas, and I think we'll have to call it an oil sketch, but it is extremely beautiful and very effective. And I'd love to know where on earth you got it from. Perhaps you can tell me.
Well, the painting belongs to St Colum's Cathedral.
St. what Cathedral?
St Colum's Cathedral in London there.
Right.
And it was a gift to the cathedral after the person who owned it died.
Oh, I see. And the person who owned it, was she the sitter, perhaps?
No, the lady in the painting is Eleanor Alexander, the daughter of a very famous lady and gentleman. Her mother was Mrs. Cecil Frances Alexander, a well-known hymn writer throughout the world, and her father was Bishop Alexander.
I confess I did a little bit of homework, and I wondered whether a portrait he exhibited in 1901 that's now in the palace in Armagh, which was entitled The Archbishop of Armagh,
right,
William Alexander,
yeah,
could have
right.
been
her father. It is, yeah.
Yes,
after he was bishop in Derry, his wife died in 1895, and he went on to be Archbishop in Armagh after that.
Yeah, I see.
And
Right.
this lady, Eleanor, left the picture to her companion, who then left it to her daughter, who then left it to the cathedral.
Oh, I see. Yeah. And you're from the cathedral, are you?
We are. We're the church wardens.
You've been deputed to bring it today.
Yes.
Yes. Drew the short straw.
Delegated.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm very thrilled you did bring it, because I think it is one of the nicest things I've seen today, perhaps the nicest, which is quite a thrill. Now, Walter Osborne died young, and he was an extremely popular man in Dublin, and he was a good teacher too, so there were many pupils and friends who mourned his passing. He died suddenly of pneumonia in 1903, and that's 2 years after this picture was painted in 1901. His work is really popular now. The value of the picture is quite a surprise, actually. I believe it to be between £40,000 and £60,000.
My goodness.
I've had to bring it down from where I started, which was possibly 60 to 80, simply because it being an oil sketch and quite late, I thought maybe I ought to be a little bit cautious. But I can see this picture, because it's so attractive, driving its price up to more than 80,000. It's a possibility.
That's wonderful news.